Good afternoon. I'm Susan Curry, Chief Operating Officer and Senior Vice President at Klingenstein Fields Advisors, and I'd like to thank you all for coming today. Cybersecurity is a topic frequently on everyone's mind, and October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. It's a good time to assess if you are doing everything you can to stay protected in the digital world, as more and more of our personal and business lives are being conducted virtually. Fortunately, with knowledge, caution, and some tips to help you stay safe, you can help reduce the likelihood of being a victim of cybercrime. We are very happy to have here with us today Jonathan Wojtkun, Senior Technology Consultant for Charles Schwab. Jonathan has over 15 years of experience in the information technology sector. He is a frequent speaker on the topic of cybersecurity, particularly in relation to financial services. Our webinar today will be a conversational format with questions and answers. Questions that we've put together for Jonathan and questions that we receive from you during this time. Helping out with moderator duties is Ellen McKay, Managing Director of Optima. During this call, you may submit questions one of two ways. If you are listening through your computer, there is a widget on the side of the screen where you may enter a question. Or you may send an email message to my colleague, Mildred Palo, at mildred.palo, P-A-L-O, @klingenstein.com. We will follow up separately if there are any questions that we do not get to during this webinar. So now, Ellen, please get us started with the first question for Jonathan.
Thank you, Susan. Jonathan, thanks so much again. I know you have a real passion for this topic, and every time I've heard you speak, I learn something new. So I'm looking forward to what you have to say today. But let's get started. We're going to start with, obviously, kind of the most common question, which is, what are the most common cyber threats? I hear all kinds of terms, phishing and hacks and cyber scams. And if you could break it down for us, that would be great.
Yeah, and I appreciate you starting with that, Ellen. First of all, I want to thank everyone for attending today. I know it's an hour out of your time. Super passionate about this topic. I think my family is kind of sick and tired of hearing me talk about best practices, but my philosophy is really if we can make ourselves a little bit more of a difficult target for cyber criminals, they'll move on to someone who's a little bit easier. And we certainly understand that they're after our finances, which is just something so emotional and so personal to all of us. So we want to make it as hard as it could be possible for them to actually get to what we hold dear, which would be our assets and our safety and our friends and our family. So we're going to talk today about some of the more common themes we see in cybersecurity. I want to talk about kind of some real life examples so you understand how these individuals operate, and then certainly some best practices to really consider and take back with you and really think about implementing in your own lives. When we talk about the most common cyber threats, we really describe email as public enemy number one. And that's simply because I think we've all been conditioned to really assuming that email is safe, it's best of breed, it's a very quick way for us to communicate with each other. And more, especially during this pandemic, email has been a little bit more of a crutch that we lean on that we probably should have. We did a study at Schwab where we realized that 85% of all fraud could simply be mitigated by a phone call. That personal touch, understanding that you are speaking to that person on the other side of the line, and really just trying to think about what possibilities there were for cyber criminals to intersect themselves in the conversation before we act upon clicking a link, following or downloading a file, sending money to a source that we think might be legitimate but is actually not. So email, public enemy number one. Web browsing is certainly going to be up there as well, whether we click on the wrong link, whether we go to a site that maybe is not as secure as we thought it would be. Certainly offering up maybe more information than we should, simply because we're accustomed to filling out fields in order to get things from websites or purchasing items and stuff like that. So we want to talk about safe web browsing as well. And then I would say the last is really social engineering, and that's a combination of any sort of media or medium in which people will either try to manipulate you through emotion, through fear, through aggression, maybe a pretend family emergency that doesn't really exist, but really pointing to our more compassionate side where we act quickly, as opposed to, again, just taking that very quick pause and thinking, is this actually a legitimate transaction, or maybe I should just follow up before doing anything to not protect myself in this scenario.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So email being the most common and
Yeah.
most dangerous, shall we say. And I know I get all kinds of emails that I wonder to myself, are they legit? Not legitimate? What should I do? Can you sort of tell us some of the things to be on the lookout for and ways we can protect ourselves?
Yeah. So I love starting with email. Ellen, I'm going to make you keep me honest, and if I drag on too long, please go ahead and interrupt me. But email is just rife with opportunity for cyber criminals. And I'm going to start with simply saying that when I have conversations with individuals, including my mother, you know, I'm too small to be a target. I'm not really that important for someone to try to target me. And the example I always bring up is I think we've all heard of Yahoo being breached. They were actually breached twice. The first time, 500 million usernames and passwords were leaked out of their system. And the next time, it was actually 1 billion username and passwords, which was basically anyone who has a Yahoo account was breached. Now, the interesting part about this scenario is simply that a nation state was looking for the email accounts of 5,500 individuals. They wanted to exploit, target, whatever. And so what cyber criminals simply did is they grabbed 500 million and they found the 5,500 that they were looking for. And what cyber criminals will do is they'll take the rest, or they'll take the information that they don't actually need, and they're going to turn it around, they're going to sell it on the dark web, and they're going to give it to someone who might be a little bit more interested in those other email addresses outside of the 5,500. So if you never think you've been compromised, if you have a Yahoo account, you've been compromised. And the reason why I always bring up Yahoo is I went to college 2000 to 2005. I went to Northeastern, which has a great co-op program, but what that meant was I was working 6 months out of the year. So school 6 months, working 6 months. Working means W-2s, it means retirement accounts. And my mom was my guardian back then. And so I would send her my W-2s because she could claim me for my first year of college. And how did I do that in 2000? I certainly emailed it to her. Now, I don't know if anyone really cares the type of money I was making 21 years ago, but what hasn't changed in that information? The spelling of my name, my social security number, maybe even some of my bank accounts that I've held for a very long time. So now you can see an individual can buy a list of Yahoo accounts online. They can download it. They can run a very simple program and just try every username and every password in yahoo.com. It doesn't matter how long it takes. We can all just go to sleep at night, wake up in the morning, and see if any of these have been targets. So if I hadn't changed my Yahoo password after realizing that Yahoo had a breach, now this individual can go into my email. Again, probably not very important information, but these individuals know how to search for information. So they could search for social or social security or finance or tax or anything in that regard. And wouldn't you know it, a sent item from 21 years ago is probably still sitting in my Yahoo account. And so now they have my tax return and they have some very important information. And like I said, the cycle continues. So maybe they don't know what to do with it. Maybe some things have changed and they're not quite sure how to exploit me from this regard. What they'll do is they understand the username and password for Yahoo. They'll attach the pertinent information they got from my tax return, and they'll go ahead and they'll resend that list, and on and on and on again. What we're seeing a lot these days as well is simply that when cyber criminals gain access to email, they're going to sit and they're going to wait and they're going to watch. We're talking 6 months, 9 months, 12 months before they decide to strike. So I looked for a house 2.5 years ago. Obviously, communication through my broker was generally over email. We know the market was hot then. Goodness, it's so much more hotter now at this point. So now there's a visceral reaction when I realize, hey, your house is available, but we need to get that deposit down. We need to put in an offer. And so what these cyber criminals will do is either if they're in my email address and they realize that I'm about to enact a legitimate transaction with sending money someplace, or if they're in my broker's account and they realize, hey, this is an individual who is now about to send money someplace in order to buy a house, they'll go ahead and put themselves in the conversation. They'll change account numbers, routing numbers. Maybe they'll send me an email at night when that individual's not around, and then they'll go ahead and delete any instance of that. So I've got that email. I trust it. I realize it's a time-sensitive matter, and now we're preying on my emotion. I need to get that money in so that I can actually get this house, because we know there's probably 20 or 30 other people who are also bidding on that property. And so without calling my broker, without questioning what might be occurring, it's email, it's legitimate. I've talked to this person for 6 months. I'm going to go ahead and take that account and routing number, and I'm going to send my money. The last thing I'm going to say is simply that we've all been impacted by some sort of credit card fraud. Target was leaked, Comcast had a problem. All the businesses have our credit card information, and it was stolen by someone. Credit cards are very easy. Credit cards, you can call the company, you can dispute the charges, and you're no worse for wear. When it comes to wiring instructions, what will happen is that money is gone. Generally, you have about a 48-hour window to try to get that money back, but more often than not, that money is now gone, and it's incredibly difficult to bring that back. So that's why call an individual, take a pause, think about what you're currently doing, and before responding to email, just go ahead and give that person a call. FaceTime is a beautiful thing these days. We can actually look to make sure that we're talking with that person, verify that information, ask them how they receive that information. So if it's second or third party, hey, how did you actually get the account number and routing number? Can we go ahead and call that person on the phone? Simply because it is a little bit of a pain to go ahead and kind of backtrace that information, but certainly much easier than trying to chase down money that I actually accidentally sent to the wrong person. So if you have an email address that you've had for a long time, if some of these scenarios have resonated with you, step number one, I would say just go ahead and change that password. Doesn't matter what it is. I think we'll talk about password managers in a little bit, but just go ahead and change that password. That way, at least, even if we don't know if we've been compromised, we're going to boot that person out of our email system, and we know that we're safe moving forward.
Great, thanks. Let me ask you before we do move on to our next question, is there any way to know if somebody is sort of sitting in your email watching and waiting, or is it sort of, well, you find out when something terrible has happened?
Unfortunately, more often than not, it's when something terrible has happened. We've had some instances where we understand that, with a WannaCry attack where someone would take over our inbox and spam a bunch of our friends and family. If you got a call from an individual and they said, listen, you sent me an email, it seems kind of weird, I'm not quite sure what's going on. Sometimes that's a red flag, but generally these individuals are very smart. They're simply reading all that information and will really have no idea whether or not they're in there. And so that clean slate idea is just go ahead, change your password, boot them out, and then go ahead and just be a little bit more vigilant moving forward.
Great. So obviously the best defense is a lot of precaution. Don't wait till it happens. Let me ask you, this is probably going to sound, I'll use my own personal experience. Often within my family, if we're relaying what we think of as some personal information, somebody says, what's the password for Netflix or something like that? And hopefully no one out there is going to take advantage of me. I'll say, don't email it to me, text it to me, because no one can really get into your texts or find it. Is that true, or am I just being naive?
So this is about the time when I always joke around and say, I'm generally invited places once, and then when I bring the doom and the gloom, I'm generally not invited back again. So we'll give two sides of that coin. So I think text messages are more secure. It's very difficult for cyber criminals right now to get into the cellular network. So you can generally trust text messages. What some people don't think about, though, is if we have an online account for paying our bill, for monitoring our cell phone account, there is an emergency contact number where if you lose your phone, if you break it, you can actually log into the website. And what you can do is you can forward your text messages and your calls to another cell phone number. And this is when cyber criminals really get kind of interesting. And it brings up another point about passwords is if your password to, let's say, Yahoo or to Hotmail or to any of these other email systems that you use is the same or similar to the other websites that you log into, as a cyber criminal, it's very easy for me to guess what that is or to just try the same password. So if your password to Verizon or AT&T.com is the same as your email and I'm in your email, well, now I'm in your cell phone. And what I can do is just send a copy of all of these text messages or cell phone numbers, or calls to my cell phone, again, without you knowing. So I like text messages. They are a little bit more secure. But again, if you have the same password as your email, if you haven't changed that password in a while, go ahead and change that password. And then when you log in, look for the auto forwarding rule within your cell phone account provider's website. Make sure it's blank. There might be an option just to go ahead and turn that off, make sure that's off. But this is another way where cyber criminals can just run with the data that we give them and impact us in so many more ways than we might not have thought about before.
Well, that's great. Now, see, I told you I was going to learn something new today, and now I did. That seems like a great segue. You talked about passwords and changing your passwords. And I know I've heard you speak before about password managers. And, I myself have thought, oh, I really should do something. I should get a password manager. And then I think to myself, oh, it's kind of a pain. It's a hassle and, it costs money. And so I never do anything. So talk to us about that, the good, the bad, how urgent is it? What should we do?
Okay. I'm glad we went there. So a couple of things about passwords. First of all, we all hate passwords. Every website we sign up for, we use a password. That's why generally people use the same or similar passwords. We're sick and tired of forgetting about them. What a gentleman from the government actually recommended 20 years ago was we need super complex passwords. So everyone knows the dollar sign or the plus sign, and we're going to change O's to zeros and T's to sevens, and we're going to make it so much more complicated than we think we need to just to protect these passwords. That same individual came out about 2 years ago and said, I was wrong. Things have changed. And now what you want to do is have very long passwords. Now think about it. I left out the complex part of that scenario. So what we're talking about here is the longer the password, exponentially stronger the security behind it. And the reason for that is if someone is trying to guess your password, if it's 6 to 8 characters, I did this, I'm taking some graduate classes right now in cybersecurity. We created a program. It took about 20 minutes. It scanned 1 million passwords and tried to input it into a file that we had locked, and it took about 30 seconds. And more often than not, the password I thought was safe was part of that million, and it opened that account. If your password is 20 or 30 characters, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's why when we talk about best practices, the next piece here is make sure that your passwords are long. Now that's going to be complicated as well. There's 1 million websites that we belong to. How do I remember all these long, complicated passwords? And so I am a proponent. It took me a while to think about putting all my eggs in one basket, but I switched to a password manager about 3 years ago. Now, I use LastPass. That's not an endorsement. They've actually had a breach. I trust their encryption, so we know that even during that breach, no passwords were compromised. LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, Keychain. If you've got Apple, it's probably baked into your system. There's plenty of them out there. What I generally recommend is if you're curious about technology such as this, what I'll do is once a year, I'll type in best password managers. And if it's something I recognize, a CNN article, a PC Mag article, a CNET article, then I trust that they are the ones who are smarter than me in determining what the best password managers are. Now, what a password manager is an encrypted environment where you can keep all your passwords safely stored. I was at my mother's, 76, recently widowed. She became obviously inheritor of all those accounts. It's really the first time she's had to worry about money. And so I went to her house and we sat down and I looked to my left and I see a red book called Passwords, and she's written everything down. There's no organization. She's probably got 2 or 3 passwords based on the website. If she's changed it a couple of times, no way to search. And certainly she's using the same passwords over and over again. So we sat down and we talked about how she could leverage a password manager. I signed her up for LastPass only because I also have LastPass. And what LastPass will do is actually allow you to share passwords securely between each other. So again, first time she's ever really had to deal with finances. She wants me to go ahead and look over her shoulder sometimes. I travel a bit simply because of the job. And so she can share that password with me and then revoke access so that I can simply log into that website, not know what her password is, help her out with whatever she needs, and then log out and never be able to access it again until she gives me access once again. So we spent about 2 or 3 hours. We went through all of her important websites. So anything with credit card information, anything financial related, anything that would have some of our personal information on it. And we used the password manager to change from her short repeating 8-character password. And we told the password manager, hey, between 20 and 30 characters, you make it up. Doesn't have to make sense. I'm never going to remember it, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to change all these passwords for all of these ancillary websites. Now, the benefit to this is that think about all the websites that you visit on a day-to-day basis. One of those websites might have had a breach. It happens all the time. And again, if I'm a cyber criminal and I'm going through, the passwords are probably hashed out, so I don't know what they are, but I see user A has a 4-character password and user B has a 30-character password. Well, which one am I going to try to break into? Obviously, the one that I can break into and guess in my lifetime. So we're making it a little bit more difficult for all these ancillary websites to lose my information and have it be compromised. Now we're back to all the eggs in one basket scenario. What we did for her login to LastPass was simply create a 20 to 30 character passphrase. It's an old Polish saying my grandmother used to say that she can just type as she says it. The one for mine is an old college phrase that I used in a club I belong to. It's all lowercase. There's spaces, there's commas. I type it like I would say it. So now I know that the password to get in is very complex. And I don't care about any of these others, because as soon as I'm in there, I can go ahead and I can just tell the password manager to fill those websites and log me in automatically. Now, I understand that obviously with increased security comes extra steps or a greater, more complex process. And unfortunately, that is a little bit of a sign-off. But what a password manager will do is really alleviate that problem. The other benefit is, like I said, I'm on the road quite a bit. My password manager will also sync with my cell phone. So all my passwords, I change them on my laptop, I change them on my computer, I change them on my cell phone. It automatically updates all those passwords. And so the next time I try to log in, it's already updated and remembered, and it's one less thing and that I really have to worry about.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. A good question, man. I'm going to pop it in, surprise you with that one before we move on, just because it's kind of related, which is, in your dealings, these folks specifically with Klingenstein Fields advisors and with Schwab, but I would extend it to obviously all financial institutions or places where you're conducting personal business. Are there other vendors or platforms or applications you should think about using to help make sure your transactions and your interactions are more secure?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I never want to have a vendor be in control of my own destiny. So that's why I think if you think about some of the best cases we talked about here, the best case scenarios, use a password manager if you have a login to your financial institutions. Use a password manager for any client portals you use. I used a client portal when I refinanced my house. They took all my information before they would quote me a rate. They had a portal. And so I uploaded those documents. I felt safe. Used the password manager to create a very long password, so I knew that was safe. And the other big thing too is simply leverage the telephone. We're all busy. I get it. I recently came back from South Africa, and what I had never realized before is that my AT&T plan now, if I just turn my cell phone on, it's $10 a day. If I turn my wireless or my cell phone off, they don't charge me. So, if I needed to make a trade, if I needed some additional funds and I needed to call someone back in the US, for $10, I can make an international phone call. I realize that I'm covered. I speak to that person on the phone. I know I did or spoke to the correct person, got the right information, and then I go ahead and turn my cell phone off. It's very easy when we're busy, when we're on the road, when we're on vacation, to just trust email too much. And I probably will say it far too many times for everyone on the phone, but you just can't trust email. So it's really these smart things that you can do. Now, you can leverage vendors like a password manager. The other thing that we'll talk about with passwords right now too is multi-factor authentication is really kind of what everyone's talking about these days. Now, the theory behind multi-factor authentication is it's two of three things. So it's something you know or have memorized, like a password. It's something you are, like a face scan on the iPhone, a thumbprint on any cell phone you might have, and or something that you hold. So your mobile device, there are apps on there that will generate a code that expires every 30 seconds. And it's incredibly difficult, as you can imagine, for a cyber criminal to have two of these three things. So if there's an opportunity, and I found this out, so I have Schwab accounts. I work at Schwab. I have to have Schwab accounts. Schwab has multi-factor on their website. So I've got a username and password to log into Schwab, and we use Semantic VIP. It generates a code that expires every 30 seconds that I need to add to the end of the password. Remember that I know. So now we're combining two of these items for multi-factor before logging in. And it's very difficult for a cyber criminal to know my password and steal my cell phone at the same time. What I quickly realized is that LastPass, I have USAA for kind of my local banking. They also leverage Semantic VIP as a multi-factor authentication device. So now I've got one app on my cell phone. I turned it on for all three sites. I'm very worried about those sites. They're either financial or password related. And now I understand I've got a long password and I've got something that changes every 30 seconds. That is about as secure as you can get. Last piece here. My mom would probably struggle a little bit simply with her understanding of technology, with also having a mobile app that she would have to log into. Also keep in mind that some of these websites will use different authenticators. Google's got one, Apple has one, Microsoft has one. And so she receives text message codes that also expire after 30 seconds. I know I talked about text messages not being as secure as a mobile device, but this is really where you need to determine what will work best for you. And I feel better that she at least has something that will text her and authenticate that she's actually the person trying to log in, than making it complicated, because if I give her all these mobile authentication devices and she gets confused, the first thing that anyone would do is simply log in, change their password to something they remember, and then do away with the whole thing. So there are always layers and kind of grayish answers to cybersecurity. And when you find the item that works for you, we're still making you a more difficult target for these cyber criminals than anybody else. And the last thing I would say is with all these vendors, simply ask. My refinance agent, like I said, they had a client portal, which was great. But what they did is they sent me a link in an email. And we just talked about email. I'll say it again, not secure. And they said, hey, click on this link, upload all your documents, and then we'll get you your rate. And I paused because you're talking client portal. That's what I like to hear. And I said, well, one, how do I know that they sent that? And two, how do I know that that URL is sending me to the right place? And so I picked up the phone. I called my agent. I said, did you send this email? Please stay on the line with me. I'm going to create my credentials. Just confirm that you see it on your end. Oh, you do? Great. Now I feel comfortable uploading all of this information. So again, just pause, think about it, talk with all of these individuals or the vendors that you work with and see what opportunities there are, and then just find what will work best for you.
No, thanks. That's great. I think we've all gotten out of the practice of picking up the phone. It's too true. So
Sure.
it's, you know,
and I'm an introvert, so if I'm saying it, then there's got to be a reason to do it. So
used other technology. And I will say I use my financial institution does happen to be Schwab. And I use the digital token, the semantic. So just a word to everybody, if you change your device or you change your computer, you're going to have to get your token re-authenticated and so it works. So if you ever get a new device and it doesn't work, that's what's happening. So that's my word of wisdom.
I like it.
What about encryption? I've heard about encrypted emails, for instance, if you're sending really sensitive information. Is that something that you use or would recommend? Is that for the average person, or is that really beyond us?
No, I'm a big proponent of encryption. So we all have heard about the ransomware attacks where individuals will, you'll click on a link, you'll download a file, and then your hard drive will be encrypted. And that cyber criminals making it impossible for you to find your device, to access your device, to get to the data that's behind it. And what will happen, it's fascinating and it's terrifying, but it's very interesting. A pop-up will happen and they'll say, we will either delete your information or we're going to leak it all online. You have 72 hours to pay us in Bitcoin, which is cryptocurrency. It's untraceable. But the interesting thing is simply that these individuals have helplines. So if you don't know how to use any of the Bitcoin technology, if you're not quite sure how to send the information to them, you can call an 800 number. An individual will pick up the phone. They'll help you set up an account, convert some money to cryptocurrency, and then tell you how to deliver it to them. The bad part about this is 50% of the time, they just take the money and run. They delete your information. They put it online anyways. And so paying them is really not a great option. Conversely, though, if we encrypt our devices before we're impacted by any of this ransomware or other viruses, it works in the opposite as well. They can't get into our systems. They can't access our data. And so I'm a huge proponent of encryption. Now, I'm an Android guy. I use Apple devices for work. Apple has great encryption. Generally, it's already turned on your laptop, cell phone, iPad, anything like that. But go ahead and double check. If you're not sure, there's probably someone in the family you could call. Apple's got the Genius Bar that's super helpful as well. But they will help you confirm that encryption is turned on. The benefit to this is if I steal your laptop or if I have my laptop stolen, if I grab your cell phone, because all that data is encrypted and impenetrable, I can't get to it. I've got a dead device. I can throw the hard drive out, your data's gone, but I have no idea what was in there and put a new one in, and now I've got a new laptop, but I can't access that information. Like I said, I travel all the time for work. Schwab gave me a laptop 8 years ago, and I've used it ever since. That device is encrypted. Because if you can imagine on a flight, maybe I'm doing some work, maybe my luggage gets stolen, maybe I pick up the wrong bag. It's a very different conversation to say, I lost my device, but we know it's secure versus I lost my device. I'm not sure what was on there. and I'm not quite sure how to get it back. If you've got Android, there are apps you can download to help you encrypt that device, so certainly take a look at those items. Generally, what we'll do is it'll require a PIN number or maybe that face scan to unlock that device. And then last but not least, for Windows machines, if you've got anything above the Home Edition, do a search for BitLocker, B-I-T Locker. It's baked into Windows. If you've got Home, you can actually add it on. I think it's a small amount just to get the upgrade for it. I don't do it on my home PC because it's a desktop, and I don't think anyone's going to come in and walk out with it. But for my laptops, for my cell phones, for anything that might travel outside the house or I might bring with me, I absolutely turn on encryption. Again, it might be an extra password. I'm creating a little bit more complexity in my life, but it's a bigger peace of mind for me to realize that I'm not a target. And if I lose that device, I'm out a device, but not all the information that might have been on there. So a big proponent of that. Definitely take a look and see if it's something that you should turn on and consider.
Great, thanks. I read all these statistics, millions of identities hacked and breaches.
Sure.
Should we just assume, not to be the gloom and doom person, because I'm trying to leave that, should we assume our information is out there somewhere? And are people trying to use it for identity theft or more for financial? I mean, obviously at the end of the day, it's financial gain either way, but is it more to steal your money or more to steal your identity? Or is it just doesn't matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a happy combination of both. So everyone remembers the Equifax breach that happened a few years ago. And the interesting part about that, and what I should also bring up as we're telling the story. So Equifax is a credit reporting agency. They're one of the big three, right? When I bought my car, they pulled my Equifax information to make sure that my credit was good. They had a server where if you disputed your credit score, if you thought that they maybe had a couple of dings on you that you had already paid off those bills, they had a location where you could upload all your supporting information. They would review your case and let you know whether or not you successfully fought that report or whatever you were trying to fight. But you can imagine all the information you would have to give in order to help fight or improve your credit score. Now, what had happened is that 23 of those server administrators got an email that said, your Apache server is out of date. There's a patch. Go ahead and update that machine. And 23 of those individuals thought the other person did it. And after 3 months, cyber criminals happened upon that server. They realized that security patch wasn't updated. They exploited that server and they stole all of that supporting information. The reason why this is so interesting is it's one of the largest breaches where we now have non-public or personally identifiable information tied directly to email addresses and to full names and to social security numbers. And so that was just a massive outflow of data. And so what these cyber criminals will do now is maybe they'll call and pretend that they're the IRS and you owe additional taxes or you're going to be audited or something was wrong with your tax return. And they have all the supporting information to try to prove that they are the IRS and they understand kind of your financial picture. An interesting thing with the privacy agreement is that when you send money between banks, no matter how you send it, individuals can't verify the name on the other end. It's a privacy violation. And so all they leverage is the account number and the routing number. And so individuals with all of your supporting information can open up a bank in your name and act as yourself. Or maybe they can exploit your identity and just create a second profile of someone as yourself simply because they have all of that supporting documentation. Now, this is terrifying to think about. I had never really given much thought to identity theft at that point. And so, what we generally talk about is there are monitoring companies and there are credit freezes. So we know the information's out there. Ellen, to your question, if it's lost, I assume that it's going to circulate for years. Because remember, if they don't know what to do with it, they're going to sell it to someone else. It's on the dark web. Anyone can buy it and try to exploit it a little bit more. So I was part of the Equifax breach. I simply assumed that all my information is now out there. And so what I did is I went to all three of the reporting agencies and I felt better doing a credit freeze. So I went to each one of the reporting agencies. I logged in. I said, freeze my credit. And what freezing your credit will do is not allow a credit card to be open, a financial transaction to occur in terms of opening an account, leasing a vehicle, creating a new bank account, checking account, whatever, until you unfreeze that credit monitoring agency. So it's a little bit of a pain, They have improved their websites. I mentioned I refinanced a couple of months ago. My steps were to log into all three agencies, unfreeze my credit. I said for 24 hours, and then it automatically relocked. The individual could run my report, get me my rate, and then they were out of the system. They didn't need access to it anymore. Reporting agencies are also a great thing to think about. I know Symantec bought LifeLock, and so that's a monitoring agency. The problem I personally have, and this is not an endorsement or not an endorsement or whatever, but with monitoring agencies, they know when something has happened. And unfortunately, at that point, it's probably too late to stop whatever has occurred. You can fight it, at least you know about it. It's certainly much better than finding out about it months or years later. But I like freezing my credit. I don't open up too many credit cards a year. I'm not really for refinancing or buying a new car all that much. And so for me to log in, unfreeze it, it might take 20 minutes to get through all three, but I feel more secure. But big proponent of either or both. So again, whatever works for you. The last thing is we know we get that free credit report once a year, or I think it's one per agency per year. Just keep an eye on what's happening. Take a look, see if there's any red flags. It's always good to review that information every 4 or 5 months, just to make sure that you're kind of double checking your work there. So, unfortunately, all of our information is probably out there, but there are some concrete steps that we can take just to protect ourselves before anything really bad happens.
No, that's interesting, because I had a similar, my accountant was breached, and so they actually said, we'll pay for LifeLock for a year or so, and we froze all of our credit accounts, credit things also, and we've never unfrozen them. It sounds like you're saying there's no particular reason other than sort of those temporary ones where you're refinancing or you're applying for some kind of credit to ever unfreeze it again. Is that sort of what you would say?
I'm a very simple man. I live in a house in New Hampshire. I don't really do too much. So I can imagine people more complex and sophisticated than I, that might not be a real solution for them. But that's it. Until someone needs to run my credit, there's really nothing else happening behind the scenes for why it would need to be unfrozen.
Yeah, good to know. Let's talk a little bit about networks, both how often when you're about, probably more when you're about. I've heard a lot about VPNs or virtual private networks. Can you explain kind of what they are and why you would, what the benefit is versus just your regular Wi-Fi?
Sure. Great topic as well. It's almost as common as email attacks that are happening. And again, data has been expensive. We don't like paying our cell phone bills any larger than we actually need them to be. And so Wi-Fi has kind of ruled, our lifestyles at this point. We all have Wi-Fi at home. We generally hop on when we're in public places, and it just makes browsing a lot easier. The problem with that, though, is that Wi-Fi networks, you don't know what you're actually connecting to. So there's a device out there. It's called a pineapple. It's interesting. Cybercriminals can actually leverage the pineapple one of two ways. They can mock a Wi-Fi network. So if you're at Starbucks, you like maybe working the first couple of hours at a Starbucks, you connect to their Wi-Fi. They'll power on a device, and it will be the exact same name. It'll be the exact same login. But what now happens when you connect to that device, you're browsing the web. You can go anywhere you want to. You can make any sort of transaction you want to. But all of your data is now flowing through a device that is not owned by anyone other than a cyber criminal. And so they can take this device. They can understand everything you did. They can log keystrokes. They can read your passwords. So we can understand why Wi-Fi could be lost that way. The other thing that a pineapple will do, and I'm guilty of this, I need to get better at it, but we all have our home Wi-Fi network. And generally when I'm out and about, I forget to turn my Wi-Fi off on my phone. So what my phone is always doing is it's just actively seeking for a network that it knows and can connect to. So if I've made Starbucks safe, obviously my home network is safe. I travel, so think Marriott, Hilton, any of those I might have connected to at some point, and I said, hey, just go ahead and connect, it's fine. This individual can be near me. They can have one of those, the Wi-Fi names attached to this device. And so my phone will look at it and say, oh, that's Hilton or that's Marriott. I'm going to go ahead and just connect to that device without me even knowing about it. So wireless data is incredibly unsecure if you're not sure of the device you're connecting to. I don't want to scare anyone. Your home Wi-Fi is perfectly fine. I don't think there's anyone parked outside of my driveway trying to figure out how to get into my own private Wi-Fi, but public Wi-Fi is very interesting. We've all been to a conference where they offer public Wi-Fi. And we're just not quite sure if we're actually connecting to where we think we are connecting to. So the two solutions are either just stay on data. Unlimited data has come down quite a bit over the past couple of years. It's tough to kind of get through everything in terms of, overcharges for the month. But the other opportunity here is a VPN. So Ellen, perfect point, virtual private network. All it is, it's a program that runs on your phone or your laptop, and it encrypts that connection before it reaches that device. So I told you I was in South Africa, didn't want to pay $10 a day for AT&T. Honestly, tried to disconnect a little bit anyways. But when we were at the lodges, we decided to hop on the Wi-Fi and just check in, make sure everything was fine. We powered on a virtual private network. I know that now that connection, no matter what I'm connecting to, just like ransomware, just like encrypting our hard drives, that conversation is now encrypted, and cyber criminals can't get into that conversation. Again, there's a ton of them out there. Once a year, I always look at CNET or PCMag's top 10 VPNs. There are some free ones. This is something I absolutely don't mind paying for. It's usually $5 or $10 a month. If you have antivirus on your machines, it might be included in that service. But go ahead and take a look, especially if you're traveling. It's something you can turn on and off as well. But either just use cellular networks, because we know those are tough to hack into right now, or certainly power on a VPN before connecting to any sort of free public Wi-Fi, or maybe even paid for that matter if you're just not aware of the environment that you're in.
Great, thanks. I'm going to pop a question in that came in before we move on, because I think I know the answer, but you are the expert. So in terms of password managers, the question is, if it was understood correctly, a password manager automatically inputs the password when logging into the site. Is that a security problem if somebody gets a hold of your advice, if you don't have multi-factor verification, and does encryption block that? So that was a lot of questions. And to everybody, if we don't get to your questions, I apologize, but certainly someone from Clean Fields or from Schwab will get back to you on any questions we don't have time to answer.
Yeah, and Ellen, I appreciate you bringing that up too. We absolutely spoke. Please continue to send in questions. If we don't get them to today, we will respond to them. If you have questions coming out of this event, please just speak to your Klingenstein Fields rep, and they will contact me, and we will certainly get those questions answered. I'm trying not to drone on too much about password managers, but I absolutely love that question. That's a great way to think. You're obviously already thinking the right way about cybersecurity. So there's two answers to that, because I'm a consultant and I can't give you a straight answer. On my phone, I make it so that I have to log into my password manager every time. It's a mobile device. I carry it with me. I could lose it any time. I certainly don't want that to be a trusted device or a trusted password where I just log right in. Now, for me, I trust my home security. And so what I have done is I tell my browser, so there's a plugin that you can install in your browser, as opposed to just going to lastpass.com or dashlane.com. And it will look for the website I'm on, and it will autofill those passwords. I have antivirus. I run updates every single night. I scan every single night. I keep my Windows machine up to date. I trust my wireless network. So I feel secure in that I'm doing everything that I feel I need to do in order to feel comfortable with that device. And so for 30 days, I tell my browser, hey, keep LastPass connected, because it's easier for me to browse the internet and I trust where I'm at. Again, I don't do that on my laptop. That's a device that goes with me. I make sure that I have to log in every single time. Extra steps, I get it, but I feel more secure in that manner. So you don't have to turn that on. You don't have to install the plugin. You could certainly log into your password manager. And if you click launch, it will actually launch a browser inside of itself and then put the username and password. So we're still in that encrypted environment. But for me, on my home network, on my home PC, I feel safe enough where it's easier for me just to go ahead and say, please autofill for 30 days. And then I'll go ahead and I'll re-enter my password and my security token in order to log in. The other piece to that question, though, because we get this a lot too, is, well, how do I know if someone else isn't trying to log into my password manager? And so what I've done is I've told my password manager, every time a new device tries to connect to you, you send me a message. You send me either a push notification on my phone or an email and tell me that something's happening. So now I can actively see if someone's trying to log in outside of my trusted devices. My email address in order to log in, like I said, I'm an Android guy. I use Google. Google also has multi-factor authentication, and every time I try to log in from a new computer, it also tells me, hey, just keep in mind, I don't trust this device. Someone's trying to log in. So those are enough active pings for me where I understand if something's happening to that password manager. So great question. Hopefully that answered it for you.
Yeah, that was great. We had a question which is interesting and that I just never even really thought of. Does Bluetooth technology affect your security at all? Is there anything you need to be cautious about when using Bluetooth?
You know, the conservative tech person in me would simply say, if you're not using it, turn it off. It is something that's actively pinging, looking for devices to either connect to or be connected to. The thing I would say about Bluetooth, though, is generally on both devices, one device has to be in pairing mode. So you have to kind of tell that device, hey, I need you to connect to something. And on your cell phone will tell you, I see this device, should I connect to it? If it's a smartwatch or if it's anything with a screen, it generally gives you a pin, and those pins have to match. Like when I connect to my car, it says, do you see these 5 or 6 numbers on your dashboard before you connect? So I'm less concerned about that. Bluetooth, I think, also has a more limited range than Wi-Fi, but it's all best practice. It's probably smarter for me just to turn both of those off until I actually need them.
Okay, great. A couple of dual questions from one person. One, is there any application or way to stop spam calls? I would love the answer to this one personally. And then same person, how do you set up a VPN? What do you need to do?
Sure.
Is that an outside application platform again? So,
Sorry, what was that first one again?
The spam calls. The
Yes,
mystery
thank you.
universe. That's like, what's the market going to do? How do we get rid of spam calls?
Right. I'm of the mindset where if I don't have your telephone number in my phone, I just go ahead and send you straight to voicemail. The problem really with spam calls is it's pretty unregulated. So there is a national do not call list. We talked about how easy it is to connect across international borders now at this point. It's really, the cost of a phone call is pretty cheap. What we've seen, and as I was coming up to speed on cybersecurity, is that, in other nation states, there will be business parks of individuals who they have translators. They'll do Australian English, they'll do British English, they'll do American English. There's a whole scale of individuals who will just do robocalls or spam calls. And so, if I don't recognize the number, I just don't pick up. If it's important, they're going to leave a voicemail for me. You can sign up for the National Do Not Call Registry, but that doesn't really cover anything outside of our borders. The other thing, and I bring this up to my mother probably 3 or 4 times a year, is if you accidentally pick up a call, we've all probably gotten the IRS phone call at some point. Let me tell you right now, the IRS is never, ever going to call you. It'll all be snail mail. But this is where cyber criminals will now feed on emotion. So we had an instance of an end client, I think they're out of the Pennsylvania area, where they knew that their grandson or their cousin was in Europe. And this individual had breached their email. They realized that travel was coming up. They scoured the emails. They found that grandparent's telephone number. And when that person was in Europe, they called and said, your grandson's been arrested. He's in jail. He needs bail money immediately. And that individual, we're preying on emotion. We're preying on our fears. We're preying on the fact that we need to act immediately. That person wired that cyber criminal, whatever that money was, for bail, only to then get a call from their grandson just saying, hey, how are things going? And realizing that they were actually not in jail. So if you ever accidentally pick up a phone, if you're not quite sure and you decide to answer your telephone, if it's anything to do with a visceral reaction, with emotion, with an emergency, we've seen some where, hey, I hit your dog and I'm at the ER and I need money or else they're not going to operate on me. So anything like that, really, that's where just pause, just think about the scenario. If I get a call from that, I'd say, all right, well, give me the name of the veterinary clinic and I'll call them directly. But we really kind of have to scrutinize now everything. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the world we live in. The VPN question is good. I'm going to tie that into, I saw the other the other question about how do we make our home network safe. So any firewall you have, so a firewall is going to be part of your wireless access point. Comcast and Xfinity have them baked into their modems now at this point. What I really tell everyone is just change the password. So Xfinity, I know, has the passphrase on the back of all their modems. I'm sure that lives in a database someplace. You can go online, you can call Comcast. My mom did it when she moved into her new place, and they'll walk you through how to change your wireless password. We're not really giving that out to anyone. And my whole thing, so my wireless password, which my wife hates, is about 15 characters long. We have guests over, they absolutely hate it. But you can save that password. And I never change it because I don't think anyone's encrypted or hacked my network. So the next time they come in, they're already connected to my network. And I trust that, I trust their device. With the VPN, you can turn on VPNs with your access points or your modems. I'd rather have it live on the device simply because I trust my own network. And so I'm more worried about when my laptop's outside of my four walls. But any cybersecurity measures are good cybersecurity measures. And so if it's something you decide to turn on, it's never a bad thing. We used to say it would slow down your speeds, but I think in this day and age, speeds are so fast, you probably wouldn't even notice it. But it's always, for me, it's more, how do I protect myself against the threats that live outside my house? And that's where that VPN would live, on the device and not your home network.
Great. That's a good segue. We're running out of time, but I do want to cover when you're out and about outside your house. A couple questions, and I'm certainly guilty of it it's been a while since I've hung out at Starbucks, but say it was a different world a couple of years ago. I'm hanging out at Starbucks and I'm just, cruising around, looking at the news, looking at a website, retail website, not buying anything, not transacting. Is that safe, or should that even not be done? And what about a hotspot through my phone? Is that a better way to go?
Yeah. Great question. The two sides of the answers there are, well, if I'm not browsing anything particularly interesting, I'm probably going to bore the person if they're looking into my history, or they're kind of sharing my screen and looking at what I'm looking at. But that just feels unnatural to me to even think that someone might be doing that. So the VPN is a great answer if you decide to connect to a public Wi-Fi. I was in Spain 4 or 5 years ago. It was astronomical for me to use my cellular network connection. So I would turn on my VPN. I'd quickly check my email or transfer money if I needed to transfer money, and then I would disconnect immediately. Again, if you do that, just look at your statements over the next couple of months. Make sure nothing else kind of weird is happening. If we did end up losing some information in that transaction, but a VPN should keep you safe. A huge proponent of personal hotspots. So we know cellular connections are secure. I will say that my Android phone had a laughable password for using it as a hotspot. So again, change that to a long password. All my laptops now recognize that wireless access piece and the password connected to it. So it'll connect automatically, and I'd rather use my cell phone than public Wi-Fi.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, one last terrifying story, and then we'll go to the next question. But we now really have to think about what we're connecting to as well. So the two big things, especially where on the road, is power, right? Our devices are dying, and the internet. There have been devices in airports where it's a USB charging port. It looks totally secure, but what someone's doing is actually downloading all your data when you plug into that with just the USB drive into that USB port on the public charging station. So electrical sockets, we know, just carry electricity. We always need to charge, but if it's free and convenient, it might not be exactly what you think it is. So just make sure that you're kind of taking all precautions in that regard as well.
Right. Sounds similar to, I guess, to when you go to the bank machine, they can steal your information through
just pull a little bit on the credit card.
All right. Well, that is a little frightening. Now I'm afraid to go anywhere, but that's okay. So one last question, just because it's sort of that mysterious thing we always hear about, and then we'll probably be out of time. The dark web. What is the dark web? How does one access it? Does one want to access it, or is it, is it a secure network that one can't get to?
Yeah, so the dark web is really where cyber criminals live. So we talked about the Yahoo breach that happened. We talked about the Equifax breach that happened. We know the internet's pretty unregulated to begin with, but the dark web is really where you sell and buy people's information. So that list of 500 million Yahoo usernames and passwords generally goes for about 23 cents an account number. An account, so username and password. I don't know how to connect to the dark web. My assumption would be as soon as I tried to, I'd be on a list somewhere and someone would be making sure that I was probably not doing what I was supposed to be doing. What I will say, though, at Schwab, and I think a lot of financial institutions do this, is we have a division that actually does surf the dark web. We look for compromised account information. We look for compromised credentials. and we'll actively buy that information off the dark web just to try to remove that information. But as we know, copies are easy to make. That's probably insufficient. But if you're trying to do something illegal, I recommend the dark web. If not, try to stay off it as much as possible.
Okay, well, I think my plan is to stay off it as much as possible. Jonathan, thank you so much. I think we're out of time. If any other questions come in, as Jonathan said, we will definitely address them, and feel free to keep sending questions. We think this is a really important topic, one that you read about all the time. It's certainly always in the news, and people are finding new ways to take advantage of people. So it pays to stay ahead of the game. Thanks everybody for attending. We hope you found it interesting, and we'll continue to keep you updated on our perspectives of special topics, including our tax webinar, which is coming up on November 2nd. Your registration invite will be coming out soon. We hope you'll join us. Again, that's a topic that is top of mind right now in terms of what's going to happen with the federal tax situation. Stay well, and we hope to see you soon, and we look forward to speaking with you soon. And Jonathan, thank you again so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.